This is a PowerPoint of APA conventions. It is by no means an exhaustive list, but this will see you get started, and most of the ways that you need to use APA will be covered in this presentation. So with any luck, this PowerPoint should be able to see you through the writing of your whole paper. I provided a 2-slide table of contents with all the topics that I've covered in this presentation. And if you have any other questions, we can certainly discuss it. There are 2 types of citations. The first type is the parenthetical citation, and the other one would be the citations that you would use on your reference page. There are 2 ways to cite a source in the text of a sentence. You can use a parenthetical citation, and of course, you're not going to be color coding it, but I just use blue font to make it easy for you to read. So I have used Allington's 3 articles in chronological order, separated by commas. Or I could use an in-text citation, beginning with Allington, and then setting the dates of his publications in parentheses, separated by commas, so that it will read just a little bit differently. But the second example demonstrates a higher level of involvement with the literature by the reader or by the writer. These are different ways that you would use citations for one or more authors. See that, or you should see that when there are 2 authors in the same publication and it's a parenthetical citation, you would separate the last names with an ampersand, not an and. Notice that with 6 or more authors, you're going to have et al. So if you happen to be the 6th author on a piece of writing, you become et al. Let's hope that doesn't happen. These are different types of citations. So if you went to a conference and you spoke with one of your favorite people, maybe Timothy Rosinski, you would cite it in the way that the first one is cited. And then there are different ways you would cite secondary source material or multiple sources. If you are using multiple sources by the same author with the same year, then the first one becomes A, the second one becomes B and C, and so on. If the first citation in the paragraph is in text, then your subsequent citations with the same source doesn't need to carry a name. Okay, so here you see Harvey and Goodvis, 2007, and then we quoted them again in the second sentence. You don't have to put Harvey and Goodvis twice, you just list the year. And it automatically assumes that it was Harvey and Goodvis. When citing a direct quote, you need to cite the page or the paragraph number. Notice there are quotation marks. Notice the comma before the parenthetical citation. In a parenthetical citation, if there are 2 people with the same name, then you would use their first initials to make the distinction between the 2. A couple of other things to remember. Titles of journal articles, the first letter is capitalized, and each word after that would be in lowercase. In a title of a text, and this would be in the reference section, the first letter is capitalized and every word after that is in lowercase, and each word in the book title is italicized. The reason I've given you this introduction here is look at the very last sentence. There are 5 citations. So when you are reading, the more people that say the same thing, the better your argument. Let's talk a little bit about secondary citations. If you are reading an article and the authors have cited a previous author in their writing, then this is called a secondary source. If you use a secondary source, and we don't recommend using them too much, then you would do it this way. So if the quote was, "At no point during the day was the student exposed to just right text," and Allington said it first, Hall said it second, and Dennis was the one who found this information and is using it in his article. Here's another example. So if you're reading and you keep seeing an article or a landmark document that is over and over and over, then you're going to want to find that article so that you too can do some original citing. So it seems that a lot of people have quoted Newkirk. So now I'm going to go to the references, find out the title of the original article, and then go try to find it and read it for myself. Because if I read it and find more information, then I'm making a stronger case that way than if I were to quote someone else. Let's talk about quotations. Whenever you take somebody else's exact words, you need to put quotation marks before the first word and before the last word. And here's an example. Notice that the phrase is in quotation marks, and then there's the page number. Quotations that are 40 words and more do not get quotation marks. And that would look like this. However, I want to caution you about using too many block quotes, because if you do a lot of block quotes, that's something that we learned in high school, to fill up a paper. So you don't want to do that unless you absolutely cannot rephrase what someone else said. In most cases, you're able to rephrase something that somebody said, or at least paraphrase it. In the reference section, you would follow this format in blue. If you're citing a book, it's the person's last name, comma, first initial, period, date of publication in parentheses, period, title of text with only first word capitalized, city, comma, state, colon, publishing company. And the very first citation here is exactly what I said, what the format is in blue. If you were citing a chapter in an edited book, it's going to look like the one below. And this is an actual chapter that was cited. Again, in the references, if you were to obtain a journal article online, this is the format that you would follow. And DOI stands for Digital Object Identifier. If for some reason your article doesn't have one, then don't worry about it, but do include the URL so that the article can be obtained by the reader. And here I've just explained how you would write a citation for an online journal, or even for a journal that's a hardcover. So the volume would be the first number, and the issue would be in parentheses and italicized. Notice you don't put Volume 6, Issue 4, but that's what it means. These are other ways to reference electronic material. These are some don'ts. There's an unnarrated PowerPoint in Blackboard, and you can read it much slower. I'm going very fast right now because I just want to point out the highlights. Use the past tense and the active voice. Try to avoid the passive voice, especially when you write things like "it was found." And the reason you want to avoid the word "it" at the beginning of a sentence is because the non-specific "it" makes the sentence confusing. What was found? Instead, identify the name of the researcher, and all of a sudden your sentence makes so much sense. So instead of saying "it was found that memorization of sight words," you can say Gunning argued that the memorization of sight words. These next few pages talk about the importance of punctuation and when to use it, independent clauses joined by a conjunction, two independent clauses using a semicolon. So take a look at this when you get a chance. Hyphenation is tricky in APA. Essentially, almost the only word that would require a hyphen is any word connected to self, like self-esteem, self-efficacy, self-monitoring. If you use words like post-assessment, that's one word. Non-essential, one word. These are just things that you want to be aware of. Numbers. This is important. Any number that's above 10, you just write out the number. Anything below 10, you're going to write out the word for that number. And of course, there are exceptions to every rule. If you have a percent, you don't want to begin your sentence with the number. You would want to begin it as a phrase or a word, like 75% of the population, you need to write out the word 75. A few more rules with multiple phrases. You want to use A, B, and C separated by parentheses rather than list them as bulleted numbers. You are not only allowed to use the first person to avoid ambiguity, but you are encouraged to use the first person. So don't refer to yourself as this writer or this researcher. You can say I. You just can't be subjective about it. You can't say things like I feel, I wish, I think. When you use the first person, you need to use it in a very objective way. For example, I reviewed the literature. I implemented a strategy. It's not conveying subjectivity in any way. And one of the reasons is because if you are working with a classroom teacher and you say the classroom teacher, then the reader doesn't know if you are the classroom teacher or you are the researcher, or if the classroom teacher and the researcher is one and the same. And finally, we have several rules for capitalizing and spacing. When you end a sentence with a period, you're not going to skip two spaces, just one. You will be using